Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Eden Mabon of lightcycleastrology.com. Well, today we've got some really big astrology to get into. I'm pretty excited about this one. We're talking about the sun's upcoming square to Mars that begins forming in the sky tomorrow or very early Saturday morning, March the 10th. And this is a really big aspect that we're going to be covering over the next week, because not only are we seeing this aspect between these two planets happen in the sky, but as this aspect begins to come together, it pulls in a triple conjunction with Mercury and Neptune in the sign of Pisces. The Sun, Mercury, and Neptune all come together at the same degree at the same time, and they all form a square to the planet Mars over in Gemini. So today we're just going to talk about some archetypal themes for the Sun square Mars. Some ways in which you could maybe feel this grabbing you as the next week unfolds, or the weekend comes through and then the next week unfolds. Ways in which you may see this just around you in the world or in the media. So we're going to get into those archetypal themes between the Sun and Mars, specifically in a square to each other. But next week, we're going to try to pull in some of the other planets that are forming conjunctions to the Sun in the sign of Pisces, and maybe deepen the topic of the astrology that's unfolding over the next week or so. So look forward to that. Before we get into today's content, please like, share on the video if you like the content. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate that. It helps the algorithm pick up the channel. Also, this channel is supported by my consultation practice at lightcycleastrology.com. So if you're ever interested in an astrology reading from me, you can always go to the website lightcycleastrology.com, send me a message, and I'll be happy to respond. Okay, let's go ahead and pull up the real-time clock as we always do and take a look at the wheel to see these planets coming together now in the sky. So before we pull in Neptune and Mercury into the mix, let's just talk about the Sun square Mars. So this is an aspect that is forming beginning tomorrow on Saturday, very early in the morning for East Coast time. For me in Hawaii, it's already beginning on Friday night. But this energy is basically beginning to form by this weekend and is going to be with us over the next 10 or 11 days. Now, a lot of people are new to astrology, or they're learning astrology. And what I wanted to do is just take a moment and explain some of the math involved and some of the language involved. Sometimes I say things and people don't always, really understand what I'm talking about. And that's because, I've never really taken the time to explain it on the channel. But I wanted to take a moment and explain, how do we see a square, first of all, form between two planets in the chart? Well, what we basically do is, we're talking about the math of a circle, which is 360 degrees. So whenever two planets are within 90 degrees of each other, 3 degrees before or 3 degrees after. So basically the range is about 93 degrees to about 87 degrees. That 6-degree range where planets are somewhere close to 90 degrees to each other, that's what we're talking about for a square, first of all. So, for instance, call it March 11th around 2 a.m. in the morning Eastern time, here is the Sun at 20 degrees of Pisces. And if you look over here at Mars, we've got Mars at 23 degrees of Pisces. So between the Sun and Mars by Saturday morning, there's about 93 degrees. So in ancient astrology, that is when the astrologers of the Hellenistic period typically said, okay, these two planets are beginning to engage each other. The energy is forming in the sky and will thus represent something, symbolically, or from the standpoint of like an omen down here on Earth. Now, as we move the clock forward here, watch what happens. First of all, all three of these planets, we've got Mercury, the Sun, and Neptune. All three of these planets are moving towards the same degree, where they all meet up at the same degree at the same time. Also, take a look at the moon, currently in Scorpio, Saturday and Sunday, and the moon is heading towards Pisces. The moon is going to move into Pisces and head towards a new moon as the sun changes signs and moves into Aries by March the 20th here. So before I roll the clock forward, I just wanted to sort of give you things to look at. Watch the chart move in this particular way. It's really interesting. So as I go forward by days now, March 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, right around March 15th, Mercury's at 24 degrees. Neptune's at 25, the sun's at 25. Now Neptune and the sun are in the same degree. Look at Mars. Mars is at 25 degrees. Now, between the sun and Mars, between Neptune and Mars as well, now the degree-based difference is 90 degrees. So this is the moment of perfection, as it was called in ancient astrology, where the aspect is becoming exact, right? And then by the 16th, we've got Mercury at 26 degrees, the sun at 26 degrees, Neptune at 25, and then we have Mars at 26 degrees. So this is the moment where all of this energy is leading up to. And, you know, if it was just the sun and Mars forming a square in the sky, that would be plenty of energy on its own. But the fact that this is happening at the same time that Mercury and the sun are coming to the same degree in Pisces at that same moment, something we refer to as a cazimi. And then also Neptune is there in the mix pretty much at the same degree. And so essentially all three planets are forming a square over to Mars. That is, in my opinion, this is one of the biggest moments of the entire year because of this three-planet conjunction square to Mars here. So obviously to delineate all of this energy in a square to Mars would be a lot. It would be pretty overwhelming to do. So today we're just focusing on the energy between the sun and Mars. But I just wanted to show you in the chart how this is such a big transit because of these other planets that are also right there at the same time. And then if we go forward now, past the exact perfected moment of the square, you see that the moon is heading towards Pisces and Mercury moves into Aries by March 18th. The moon moves into Pisces by March 19th. The sun is at the very last degree of Pisces, and we're about to have the spring equinox where here comes the sun changing signs, moving into Aries. This is the spring equinox moment. And then shortly thereafter, the moon sweeps by and we're at a new moon. So technically, the moment that the sun moves into Aries, the square between Mars is broken up. The reason for that is because in ancient astrology, the ancient astrologers were employing whole sign aspects. So in other words, from Aries to Gemini, if a planet is in anywhere in the whole sign of Aries and another planet is anywhere in the whole sign of Gemini, they form a whole sign sextile aspect to one another. So because ancient astrologers were using whole sign aspects as well as degree-based aspects, even though technically the degree-based aspect is still just barely within that 87-degree range between one another, when the sun crosses over into Aries, the sun and Mars then begin forming a whole sign sextile aspect to one another. So that square aspect technically is finished by then, even though it's hanging on by a thread by degree-based aspects. So I hope I didn't confuse you with that, but essentially this aspect would technically, through the lens of looking at it as an omen or as some kind of divine, message, this energy is closing out by basically the spring equinox here on March 20th. So that is the timing of this. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the archetypal themes that come about whenever we see the sun and Mars move into a square with one another. How do we see this showing up either just, as maybe feelings or emotions that tend to grab us and, feelings that are noticeable for us either internally and also, of course, themes to watch for out there in the world, within our own lives as we interact with people, or sometimes things that you can see in the news cycle and so forth. So theme number 1 here: a change in direction, motivation, or ambition that comes into conflict with the momentum of our actions. So as many people know, the sun is, in ancient astrology, is connected to that solar theme of purpose or motivation. The sun as an archetype really gets at the image that stirs us, that motivates us, that sort of provides us some kind of image or direction to our life. The sun is kind of the leader of what we want to do with ourselves day to day and over the course of a lifetime. So whenever the sun is involved in astrology, you get themes that are connecting to what it is that we want for ourselves or our lives, images that come along and say, yes, that's what I see for myself. So whether that's in the form of like a life direction that you're taking, or in terms of like something that's really motivating you just in the current moment, doesn't have to be forever, just at the current time, something that's really driving you. That's sort of the solar theme. And when that comes into squares are said to be of the nature of Mars. And Mars is a archetype that deals with conflict or challenge or things that we have to overcome, maybe fight for or defend, right? He's the warrior. So you get this warrior kind of aspect that is somehow connected to the way that we're trying to drive or steer our current trajectory within our lifetime. And this square over to Mars could be speaking to some way in which we're already in motion and in action. So theme number 1 really gets at is something shifting around what we see for ourselves that somehow butts heads with the kind of momentum that we already have, right? We're already like barreling down the train tracks, and it's as if theme number 1 is getting at all of a sudden an image comes in or something flashes in you and says, oh my gosh, I'm not sure that the way that I'm going currently is the way that I want to go. So that's theme number 1. Okay, theme number 2 is when spirit dominates muscle. So one very interesting thing about this aspect is the sun is to the right of Mars. If you look at the chart and you sort of look at the middle of the wheel, whatever planet is to the right is going to be the planet that is thought of as the dominant planet. So in ancient astrology, the planet to the right was it was called upon the 10th. It was 10 places to the planet to the left. And that was thought to be the planet that was dominating the other planets. So in this particular formation between the sun and Mars, the sun is to the right, Mars is to the left. And that means that the sun is the one that has the dominating influence between the two planets. And the sun is connected to spirit. It's the indwelling spirit that animates the corporeal, how do you say it? Corporal form of the body, right? The sun is the one that archetypally represents whatever animating spirits that is shed from, the cosmos or from God, or however you view that. That is the thing that leaves at the moment of death. So generally, it's easy to understand if you give it some term like spirit, right? When spirit dominates the muscle, Mars is the muscle in this situation. So you sort of get the sense that when the sun squares Mars, one theme that definitely comes through is sort of having a spirit that can't be broken, a spirit that says, I'm going to do whatever it takes, no matter how hard it is, no matter how much strength I need. It's a time where you can sort of Call upon your deepest reserve of strength through like a spiritual means of saying, it's like, I'm not going to give up. It almost reminds me of like those stories of, women that like are able to lift a car off of their child, like in a car accident or something like that, where spirit just like does something almost impossible and dominates the muscles, or sequesters the strength that you didn't even know you had, either, spiritually or physically, maybe. So this is a time where we do see things like that with the Sun square Mars. Okay, theme number 3, inflexible, fanatical, arrogant, a sort of I know best, unbending ideological viewpoint that causes discord or arguments, etc. We have to remember that the sun is in the sign of Pisces, and Pisces was ruled by Jupiter. So you have the sun filtering through Jupiter, and sometimes Jupiter, in Jupiter's shadow quality, Jupiter can be very, very like zealotous or fanatical or arrogant. So one shadow side of the sun square Mars is definitely sort of that air of arrogance where you just believe that somehow you know better than everybody, which it may be true. It may be that you do know better than everybody in something particular. But it also may not be, right? It's anybody's guess. But there's this feeling that sort of takes a hold of us that says, I know best, and there's no, like, I'm not going to see any other viewpoint. It's sort of unbending. And it might be something ideological, like, because we're talking about the sun filtering through a Jupiter sign. So it could be something that you have very strong beliefs on, something that's, like anything that you believe politically, or whatever the case may be. But there's some kind of ideological viewpoint that may be the cause of discord, may cause arguments. You're talking about Mars in the sign of Gemini, a Mercury ruled planet. So we may see discord through communication or arguments, maybe ideas that we have. There's something ideologically driven here that may cause disruption or discord, arguments, conflict within a situation. So that's theme number 3. It's more of a shadowy kind of angle to this aspect. Okay, theme number 4, important people taking a stand of principle and attack or defend some ideological perspective. So this is related, but this is a way in which you could maybe see this out there in the news cycle, where some kind of important person, some kind of solar figure, whether that's like a CEO or a president, a leader, a religious leader, anybody that has power or importance that could be kind of a solar-y kind of figure, that takes a stand on principle of some kind or another, and sort of gets embroiled in maybe making an attack, or maybe having to defend themselves or defend something. This is kind of a time where we see like big important people coming out and just flexing their muscles and saying, this is what I believe, this is the hill that I stand for, that I'm going to die on. So I have a few examples of this, but I don't want anybody to read into this. I'm just choosing these examples because these were the most easiest ones for me to come up with. But for example, it could be like a leader who dominates the news cycle. Back in the day when Donald Trump was the president, he dominated the news cycle. So I'm just trying to give you a sense of this energy, where if you think back, you just remember that whether you like Donald Trump or you hate Donald Trump, that's not the point here. The point here is that he was a figure that just inflamed the news cycle, right? One way or another, whichever side or whatever you think about the man himself. This is kind of an example of how you could see this maybe coming through over the next 10 days or so, is somebody important that just maybe inflames the news cycle like that, or inflames some situation in the world. So that's one example. It also could be another example I could see in this is maybe like a very powerful CEO of a corporation, somebody like Elon Musk that has a big impact on financial markets. Remember that Mars is in the sign of Gemini. Gemini is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is archetypally connected to things like money markets. So could there be something disruptive happening in money markets caused by just somebody really, really powerful, important, a CEO, a leader in business or industry, something like that. Somebody like an Elon Musk that comes along and says, I'm going to do something with Twitter, right? That gives you kind of another example. A political figure who threatens to use the armed forces. Now, originally I had Osama bin Laden as this real life example, but that seemed kind of outdated. But in my mind, it was like, okay, the sun's in Jupiter's sign. So you're getting kind of like a religious or like a fanatical kind of guy that is going to be all about using force, or at least threatening to use force. And I was like, that example is so outdated. So all I did was go to Google and search for news today. And the first thing that pops up is some article about China's prime minister, Xi Jinping, threatening that if America doesn't change its course of direction, that it's going to lead to war. Right. So this is one example where you could see this aspect sort of already kind of coming into the news cycle here. So that's one that was kind of interesting right off the bat. Theme number 5, a crisis of action based on what you can imagine, overcoming an obstacle with courage or belief. So one thing that's interesting about this particular aspect is we are talking about the sun being to the right of Mars. And if you look at that aspect from the standpoint of a synodic cycle, meaning the sun and Mars going through a conjunction together, and then over the course of time, that aspect separating out, going through the course of an opposition. Now we're coming back to what is known as the closing square within the synodic cycle between Sun and Mars. So it's rather like a last quarter moon, where if you sort of extrapolate that theme, the last quarter moon is about a time of sort of letting go and preparing for the new moon to come through. Very interesting to me that if you remember when we were looking at the real-time clock, that the moon was actually going through the last quarter phase as this dynamic between the sun and Mars was already within the range of engagement. So I'm sort of pulling in a little bit of that last quarter moon theme with this theme number 5 here, where there's kind of a crisis of action. And the sun in Pisces is very much about what can we imagine, right? The sun in a Jupiter-ruled sign, and Jupiter being a very optimistic and hopeful planet that is ruling over a sign that is pre-springtime, ready for the light to return, that hopeful energy of the pre-spring coming, has a lot of imagination. So this is the sun representing a kind of image that comes along that's like, what can you imagine? Can you imagine something bigger than you normally do for something for yourself or for your life, something that's possible? I always remember there was this very interesting, what was it, a movie? I forget. I think it's called The New World. Yes, it was called The New World. And in the movie, I remember that there was something about when the ships of, was it England? I think when the English ships showed up on the east coast of the United States, the Native Americans were out there, and it was the first time they had ever seen anything like that. They'd never seen ships. And I don't know where I heard this, but I heard this somewhere where it was reported that they actually didn't or couldn't see the ships because there was nothing in their experience that prepared them to see these ships. So because they couldn't imagine what the heck they were looking at, it was like they couldn't see them. this theme is a little bit like that. It's like, is there something that you see all of the sudden now that you couldn't imagine before that sort of gives you the courage to take some kind of action or move in a way that you normally wouldn't or haven't done before? There is definitely that kind of hopeful, optimistic thing that just sort of grabs a hold of your spirit and is like all of a sudden you can just imagine a future that wasn't there before. Now, I suppose that could be good or bad. Maybe it's a future that you don't want, or maybe it's a future that you do want. Now, this is the sun moving through Pisces. Pisces can either swing between very hopeful optimism and sort of like giving up and like hopelessness. So it's hard to say which way that this theme might grab some people out there, but I suppose it could be both ways. But anyway, this sense of like belief, overcoming something through the gaining of courage, to do something. Okay, theme number 6 is a time to let go of something we're doing or a direction we're heading in. This is a lot like that last quarter moon energy again, where we are talking about the sun in a closing square to Mars, synodically speaking. So again, Mars oftentimes can represent a cutting away or a severing of something. And this is a square, which is said to be of the nature of Mars again. So could we be shown something right now that gives us an indication that we need to change something or cut something out or just go in a new direction or let go of something that isn't serving us right now? I could definitely see that sort of being a theme for this Sun square Mars aspect over the next couple of days or so. So this is something that might propel you into shedding something, getting rid of something in your life that maybe isn't good for you or whatever. Okay, and lastly, we have theme number 7, knowledge over action. So the sun in a Jupiter-ruled sign such as Pisces. The sun was connected in astrology over the hundreds of years going back, has always had some connection to knowledge or gnosis just within itself. But of course, Jupiter also has that connection, archetypally speaking, to knowledge. So we're talking about a sun that is very empowered in a kind of wisdom or knowledge or truth or justice. So could there be a theme that simply says there's truth over action? And what does that cause? Does it cause people to take a look at something and stop doing something or start doing something? How many ways could we see knowledge simply kind of trumping that let's just go forward and just do something without thinking about it? This could definitely be a moment where we maybe find or discover the wisdom that somehow has a really big impact on actions that we're taking, things that we're doing, something like that. All right, so that's what I have for today. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. I really appreciate that. Please leave some comments how you see this energy unfolding, maybe things that you notice or experience as time goes on here. Next week, we're going to get into more of the puzzle pieces with the Mercury and Neptune getting involved in the mix. So I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you back on Monday for another astrology video. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.